I'll never forget the look on my daughter Tanya's face when she pulled up to that house for Sunday dinner and saw me standing on the marble steps of the Ashford estate. Her mouth fell open so wide I thought her jaw might unhinge. My son Deshaun was right behind her in his flashy car, the one he bought with money that should have been mine. He slammed on the brakes so hard his tires screeched. My youngest, Crystal, was the last to arrive. She actually got out of her car and just stood there in the circular driveway, staring up at the mansion like she'd seen a ghost. "Mama?" Tanya finally managed to say. "What are you doing here?" I smiled down at them from the top of those grand steps, wearing the nicest dress I'd bought in 30 years. Behind me stood Quincy Patterson, my lawyer, holding a thick folder of documents. "I live here now." "Baby," I said, my voice steady and strong. "This is my house. All of it." Deshaun's face turned from confused to angry in about 2 seconds. "Your house? Mama, stop playing. Whose house is this, really?" "Mine," I repeated. "Mr. Wendell Ashford passed away 3 months ago, and he left me everything. This mansion, his investments, his accounts. Everything." Crystal's legs must have gone weak because she grabbed onto Tanya's arm. "But you were homeless," she whispered. "You were sleeping in shelters. We thought you were... We thought..." "You thought what?" I asked, letting the question hang in the air. "You thought I'd die out there? You thought I'd come crawling back to beg you for help?" Tanya's face went pale under her makeup. She knew. They all knew what they'd done to me. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you how I ended up on those steps, and what my own children did that put me on the streets in the first place. Before we continue, please drop a comment if you've ever experienced something like this. We'd love to hear your story, and subscribe to the channel to help us grow. 52 years. That's how long I was married to Clayton Burke. We met at a church picnic in 1970 when I was just 23 years old, and he was 25. He was the finest man I'd ever seen, with shoulders broad enough to carry the world and a smile that made my knees weak. We got married 6 months later, right there in that same church, with everyone we loved watching us promise forever to each other. Clayton worked in manufacturing, starting on the factory floor and working his way up to management. I worked, too, as a secretary at a small investment firm downtown. The pay wasn't much, but I liked the work. I was good with numbers, good with organizing things, good with keeping track of details that other folks missed. We had 3 children. Tanya came first in 1972, then Deshaun in 1975, and finally Crystal in 1978. I left my job to raise them, and Clayton worked extra hours to make sure we had everything we needed. We weren't rich, but we were comfortable. We owned our home, a nice 3-bedroom house in a good neighborhood. We went to church every Sunday. We had cookouts in the summer and Christmas dinners that filled the whole house with family and love. I thought I'd raised my children right. I taught them to say their prayers, to respect their elders, to help folks who needed help. I made sure they went to college. Tanya became a real estate agent, Deshaun went into sales, and Crystal became a dental hygienist. They all did well for themselves, or so it seemed. But somewhere along the way, something changed in them. Maybe it was their spouses. Tanya married a man named Gerald who always seemed to be counting other people's money. Deshaun's wife Simone was the type who needed the biggest house and the fanciest car to feel important. Crystal's husband Roger was always talking about investments and returns and equity, like people were just numbers on a spreadsheet. Or maybe it wasn't their spouses at all. Maybe I just didn't see who my children really were until it was too late. What my children didn't know, what nobody knew except me and Clayton, was that I wasn't just a secretary at that investment firm. Back in 1969, before Clayton and I even met, the owner of the firm, Mr. Ashford Sr., offered me something special. He was starting a new company, and he needed investors. I had a little money saved up from working since I was 16. Not much, just $2,000. But Mr. Ashford said every bit helped. "Put this money in, Mildred," he told me, "and I'll make you a silent partner. You'll own shares. If this company does well, you'll do well too. I was just 22 years old, but something told me to trust him. So I invested my money. Mr. Ashford drew up papers making me a shareholder. Then I met Clayton, got married, had babies, and honestly, I just forgot about those shares. The company sent me small dividend checks every few months, maybe $50 or $100. I'd deposit them in my own private account and use the money for little extras. A new dress for church. Books for the kids. Nothing big enough for Clayton to ask questions about. The company grew over the years, but I never paid much attention. I was busy raising children and keeping house. Mr. Ashford Sr. died in 1995, and his son Wendell took over. Wendell was about Clayton's age, a quiet man who never married and lived in that big mansion all by himself. I'd see him sometimes at the bank or the grocery store, and we'd nod hello, but we didn't really know each other. Or so I thought. Clayton got sick in 2019. Cancer. It came fast and mean, and within 6 months my husband of 50 years was gone. I held his hand when he took his last breath, and I felt like half of my soul left with him. After the funeral, after the repast at the church, after everyone went home, my children sat me down at my kitchen table. Tanya did most of the talking. "Mama, we need to discuss your situation," she said, using that voice she used with clients. Professional, distant. My situation? I was still wearing my funeral dress. Clayton had been in the ground for 3 hours. "The house, Mama," Deshawn said. "Dad left everything to you, but you're alone now. This house is too big for one person. The maintenance, the taxes, the utilities. It's too much for you to handle by yourself." I looked at my son. "I've been handling this house for 40 years. "But you're getting older," Crystal added, reaching across the table to pat my hand like I was a child. "We're worried about you. What if you fall? What if something happens and you're all alone?" "We think you should sell the house," Tanya said. "Move into a nice apartment, something small and manageable. We can help you find a place." I shook my head. "This is my home. Clayton and I built our life here. I'm not selling." I watched something pass between my children's eyes, some silent communication that excluded me completely. "We'll talk about it later," Tanya finally said. "You're grieving. We all are." But they didn't let it rest. Every time they visited, which became less and less frequent, they brought up selling the house. They brought me brochures for senior living facilities. They talked about how much money I could make if I sold. What they didn't talk about was where that money would go. But I wasn't stupid. I saw how Deshawn's eyes lingered on my furniture, how Tanya walked through the rooms like she was already measuring for her own things, how Crystal took pictures of the backyard and the garden Clayton had planted. Then, 8 months after Clayton died, I came home from church one Sunday to find all 3 of my children sitting in my living room with a man I didn't know. "Mama," Tanya said, standing up. "This is Leonard Hayes. He's a real estate attorney." My heart started pounding. Why is a real estate attorney in my house? "We need to talk," Deshawn said. "Sit down, Mama." I didn't sit. "Get out. All of you. Get out of my house right now." "It's not legally your house," Leonard Hayes said, opening his briefcase. "Not entirely." That's when they showed me the papers. Clayton had put the house in a trust years ago, they said. A family trust. That meant all 4 of us owned it together. Me, Tanya, Deshawn, and Crystal. And if 3 out of 4 owners wanted to sell, they could override the 4th. "You're lying," I said. "Clayton would never do that without telling me." But they had documents with Clayton's signature, legal documents, filed and notarized and official. Looking back now, I don't know if those papers were real or forged. I was so shocked, so hurt, so confused that I didn't think to get my own lawyer. I didn't think to fight. I just stood there while my children told me they'd already accepted an offer on my home. "We'll give you your share, Mama," Crystal said. 25%. That's fair. Fair? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. This is my home. And you'll get your portion, Tanya said. But the house is sold. The new owners take possession in 30 days. We've already found you an apartment. I don't want an apartment. I want my home. Deshaun stood up, and he was taller than me now, broader, and he used his size to intimidate me in my own living room. The decision is made, Mama. You can accept your money and move peacefully, or we can have you removed. Your choice. I looked at my children, really looked at them, and I didn't recognize them anymore. These weren't the babies I'd nursed and raised and sacrificed for. These were strangers wearing familiar faces. Get out, I whispered. They left. And 30 days later, they came back with movers and boxes and put my entire life into storage. The apartment they'd found was a tiny one-bedroom in a building that smelled like mildew and regret. They handed me a check for $75,000, a quarter of what they'd sold my home for. I lasted 2 months in that apartment before I couldn't pay the rent anymore. The money ran out faster than I expected. There were fees I didn't know about. The storage unit cost money every month. I had medical bills from Clayton's cancer treatment that I was still paying off. I tried to stretch that money, tried to make it last, but it was like trying to hold water in my hands. I called my children. None of them answered. I left messages. No one called back. The eviction notice came on a Tuesday. I had 1 week to get out. I packed what I could carry into 2 suitcases and left the rest behind. I was 76 years old, and for the first time in my life, I was homeless. The first shelter I went to was full. The second one had a bed, but it was in a room with 12 other women, and someone stole my suitcase during the night while I was in the bathroom. The third shelter was run by a church, and the volunteers were kind, but the despair in that place was thick enough to choke on. I stayed there for 2 weeks, sleeping on a cot, eating donated food, wondering how my life had come to this. Then one day, I was sitting in the public library, trying to stay warm and look at job listings on their computers, when someone sat down next to me. "Mrs. Burke?" a quiet voice said. I looked up and saw Wendell Ashford. We'd been neighbors, in a way. His mansion was on the same street where my house used to be, just down at the end where the properties got bigger and the trees grew thicker. I'd seen him over the years, always alone, always quiet. Clayton used to wave to him when we drove past. "Mr. Ashford," I said, trying to smooth down my hair. I hadn't been to a salon in months. I was wearing the same clothes I'd worn for 3 days. "I heard about Clayton," he said. "I'm sorry for your loss. He was a good man." "Thank you. And I heard about what your children did." I felt shame burn through me. "I don't want to talk about that." "I have a proposition for you," Wendell said. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a business card. "I'm looking for a live-in assistant, someone to help manage my household. The pay is fair, and room and board are included. You'd have your own suite of rooms in the mansion." I stared at him. "Why would you offer me this?" "Because I remember you," he said simply. "You invested in my father's company when nobody else would. You took a chance on us. That $2,000 you gave us in 1969 helped us get started. I've never forgotten that." "You knew?" "My father kept meticulous records. When he died, I inherited his files. I saw your name. I've been meaning to thank you for years, but I'm not good with people. I keep to myself too much." He stood up. "The offer stands. Think about it." He walked away, leaving me holding his card. I went to the Ashford estate the next morning with everything I owned in one remaining suitcase. Wendell gave me a tour of the mansion, which was beautiful but lonely. 12 rooms and only one person living there. He showed me my suite, which was bigger than the apartment my children had stuck me in. Private bathroom, sitting room, bedroom with a view of the garden. "I don't need much help," Wendell explained. "I have a cleaning service that comes twice a week. I just need someone here, someone to talk to sometimes, someone who understands what it's like to lose people you love." I understood then that Wendell Ashford wasn't offering me a job. He was offering me a lifeline, and he was lonely enough to need one too. I moved in that day, and for the first time in months, I slept through the night. My children didn't know where I was. I didn't tell them. As far as they knew, I'd disappeared into the shelter system. I didn't exist to them anymore, so I decided they didn't exist to me either. Wendell and I fell into an easy routine. I'd make breakfast while he read the newspaper. We'd eat together and talk about small things, the weather, the news, books we'd read. He loved mysteries. I loved biographies. We'd argue about them over coffee like we'd been friends for years. I kept the household running smoothly. I coordinated with the cleaning service, managed the grocery deliveries, made sure the gardeners knew what needed trimming. I cooked dinners that filled that big, empty house with the smell of home. Pot roast, fried chicken, collard greens, mac and cheese. All the foods my mama taught me to make. Wendell ate like a man who'd been starving. "I haven't had a home-cooked meal in 20 years, he told me. 3 months passed, then 6, then a year. Wendell's health started to decline. He'd always been thin, but he got thinner. He tired easily. One day, he collapsed in the hallway, and I called an ambulance. At the hospital, they told him he had congestive heart failure. His heart was giving out. "I don't have much time," Wendell told me when we got home. "Maybe a few months, maybe less." "Then we'll make them good months," I said. And we did. We watched old movies together. We sat in the garden and fed the birds. We talked about our lives, our regrets, our hopes. He told me about the woman he'd loved who married someone else. I told him about the children who'd betrayed me. "I'm changing my will," Wendell said one afternoon. We were sitting on the back patio, watching the sunset. "You don't need to do that." "Yes, I do. I don't have children. I don't have siblings. My cousins haven't spoken to me in 30 years. But you're here. You've made this house a home again. You've given me companionship in my last days. And more than that, you were there at the beginning. Your investment helped build everything I have." "That was nothing, just $2,000. "It was everything," he said. "It was faith. It was trust. It was the foundation we built on." He looked at me with eyes that knew death was coming. "I'm leaving it all to you, Mildred. The house, the investments, the accounts, everything." "Wendell, I can't." "You can, and you will. My lawyer is drawing up the papers this week. I'm of sound mind and body, well, sound mind anyway." He smiled. "This is what I want." He died 6 weeks later, peacefully in his sleep. I found him in the morning, lying in his bed like he was just resting. I held his hand and cried for this quiet, kind man who'd saved my life and then given me his. The funeral was small, just me, his lawyer Quincy, a few business associates, and some folks from his company. I sat in the front row and mourned another good man gone from this world. After the service, Quincy asked me to come to his office. That's when he read me the will. Everything. Wendell hadn't been exaggerating. The mansion, worth $3 million, investment accounts worth another $4 million, the company shares, which were worth more than I could even comprehend. All of it, to me. "There will be some people who contest this," Quincy warned me. "Distant relatives who'll crawl out of the woodwork." But Mr. Ashford was very clear and very thorough. He had doctors certify his mental competency. He left detailed explanations for why he made this choice. The will is ironclad. I sat in that lawyer's office and realized that I'd gone from homeless to a multimillionaire in less than 2 years. And my children had no idea. I thought about calling them. I thought about being the bigger person, about forgiving them, about extending an olive branch. Then I remembered how they'd looked at me in that apartment, how they'd counted my worth in dollar signs, how they'd left me on the street to survive or die. No, they'd made their choice. Now I'd make mine. I decided to invite them to Sunday dinner, at the mansion, my mansion. I had Quincy standing beside me when they arrived. I wanted a witness to their faces, their shock, their realization that the mother they'd thrown away was now richer than they'd ever be. And now, Watching them stand in that circular driveway, gaping up at me, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Power. Tanya was the first to recover. She climbed the steps toward me, her high heels clicking on the marble. "Mama."
"I don't understand. How do you own this house?"
"I inherited it from Wendell Ashford. You remember him, don't you? He lived down the street from the home you stole from me." "We didn't steal." "You stole," I said, cutting her off. "You forged papers, or twisted the truth, or manipulated your dying father's trust. However you did it, you stole my home and you left me homeless." Deshawn joined his sister on the steps. "We gave you money. We found you an apartment. You gave me a fraction of what that house was worth, and that apartment was a slum. I couldn't even afford to stay there." "So you manipulated some old man into leaving you his fortune?" Crystal said, her voice rising. "You're calling us thieves when you—" "When I what?" I asked, my voice deadly quiet. "When I befriended a lonely man? When I kept him company in his final days? When I made him meals and sat with him and treated him with the dignity and respect you never showed me?" I stepped closer to the edge of the stairs. Wendell left me this house because I was there for him, because I cared about him, because unlike you, I understand that people are more than just bank accounts waiting to be emptied. Quincy stepped forward. "I'm Mr. Ashford's attorney. Everything Mrs. Burke is saying is true. Mr. Ashford was of sound mind when he made his will. Mrs. Burke is the legal owner of this estate and all Mr. Ashford's assets." Tanya's face twisted. I could see her mind working, calculating, scheming. "Mama, we're family. Whatever problems we've had in the past, we can work through them. You don't need all this space for yourself. Maybe we could—" "No," I said simply. "No? No, you cannot move in. No, I will not give you money. No, I will not forgive you. You wanted me gone, so I'm gone. I'm not your mama anymore. I'm just the woman who lives in the mansion next door to the house you stole." Deshawn's face turned red. "You're really going to cut us off? Your own children?" "You cut me off first. You cut me off when you put me on the street. I'm just returning the favor." Crystal started crying, but they were angry tears, not sad ones. "We were trying to help you." "Help me?" I felt rage boil up from somewhere deep inside. "You want to know what help looks like? Help is what Wendell Ashford did. A stranger showed me more kindness in one day than you showed me in a lifetime. He's the one who helped me. You three just helped yourselves." I turned to walk back into my house, my beautiful mansion, my home. "Mama, wait!" Tanya called out. "We need to talk about this." I looked back at her. "No, we don't. You're not welcome here. If you set foot on this property again, I'll have you arrested for trespassing. Quincy has already filed the paperwork." "You can't do this!" Deshawn shouted. "I can, and I am. Goodbye." I walked through my front door and closed it on their shocked, angry faces. Through the window, I watched them argue among themselves in the driveway, their voices carrying on the wind. Then they got in their cars and drove away, tires squealing, engines roaring. I stood in the foyer of the Ashford estate in the home that was now mine, and I finally let myself feel everything. The pain of betrayal, the satisfaction of justice, the grief for all I'd lost, the hope for what came next. Quincy touched my shoulder gently. "Are you all right, Mrs. Burke?" "I will be," I said. "For the first time in a long time, I really will be." But I was wrong, because 3 days later, my daughter Tanya filed a lawsuit claiming I'd manipulated Wendell Ashford and stolen her inheritance. The war wasn't over. It was just beginning. The lawsuit papers arrived on a Saturday morning, delivered by a process server who apologized 3 times for interrupting my breakfast. I read through the document while my coffee got cold, and with each page, my anger grew hotter. Tanya wasn't just claiming I'd manipulated Wendell. She was claiming elder abuse. She said I'd isolated him from his family, controlled his finances, and coerced him into changing his will while he was mentally incompetent. She was asking the court to void the will and distribute Wendell's estate to his rightful heirs, which apparently now included my children as the family of the woman who cared for him. The audacity of it took my breath away. They'd thrown me on the street, and now they wanted to claim they deserved the fortune of the man who'd saved me. Deshawn and Crystal had signed on as co-plaintiffs. All three of my children were united again, just not for me. Against me. I called Quincy immediately. "I've already received notice," he said. "I expected this. Greedy relatives always come out when there's money involved. I just didn't expect it to be your own children." "What do we do?" "We fight. We have Wendell's medical records showing he was completely competent. We have witnesses who can testify that you cared for him with kindness and respect. We have his own written testimony explaining exactly why he left everything to you. And most importantly, we have the truth on our side." "Will that be enough?" Quincy was quiet for a moment. "In my experience, Mrs. Burke, the truth doesn't always win in court, but it usually wins eventually. We just have to be patient and thorough." Patience had never been my strong suit, but I didn't have a choice. The next few weeks were a nightmare of depositions and document requests. Tanya's lawyer, a sharp-dressed man named Vernon Pike, treated me like a criminal in my own attorney's office. He asked me questions designed to make me look like a con artist. "Isn't it true that you sought out Mr. Ashford specifically because you knew he was wealthy?" "No." "He approached me." "But you knew who he was, didn't you? You knew he owned the Ashford estate?" "I knew he was my neighbor, that's all." "And when did you first learn about the extent of his wealth?" "When his lawyer read me the will after he died." Vernon Pike smiled like he didn't believe a word I said. "So you expect this court to believe that you had no idea you were living with a multimillionaire?" "I knew he had money. I didn't know how much, and I didn't care. I was grateful for a place to live and a kind man's company." "A kind man who conveniently died and left you everything." Quincy slammed his hand on the table. "Mr. Pike, if you're implying my client had anything to do with Mr. Ashford's death, I suggest you present evidence or withdraw the insinuation. Mr. Ashford died of congestive heart failure that was well documented by multiple physicians over several years." Vernon Pike backed off, but the damage was done. I could see where this was going. They were going to paint me as a predator who'd targeted a vulnerable old man. After the deposition, I went home to my mansion and sat in the dark. For the first time since Wendell died, I wondered if I should just give it all up, give my children what they wanted, walk away and find peace somewhere else. But then I remembered standing in that shelter, sleeping on a cot, having nothing. I remembered the feeling of being invisible, disposable, forgotten. And I remembered that Wendell had wanted me to have this. He'd been clear and deliberate and certain. I wasn't going to let my children take that away from me. Not again. The next morning, I did something I hadn't done in almost 2 years. I went to church. My old church, the one where Clayton and I had gotten married, was too far away now. But there was a church just 2 blocks from the mansion, a beautiful brick building with stained glass windows, and a sign out front that said, "New Hope Baptist Church, all are welcome." I walked in on a Sunday morning wearing one of the new dresses I'd bought, and I sat in the back pew. The choir was singing, their voices lifting up to the rafters in a song I remembered from childhood. "His eye is on the sparrow." My mama used to sing that song while she cooked Sunday dinner. The pastor was a woman, which surprised me. Pastor Denise Carmichael. She was maybe 50 years old, with gray locks pulled back from her face and eyes that seemed to see right through to your soul. Her sermon that morning was about forgiveness and justice, and how sometimes people confuse the two. "Forgiveness doesn't mean letting people harm you," she said. "Forgiveness means releasing the poison of hatred from your own heart. But justice? Justice means standing up and saying no more. You will not treat me this way anymore. And sometimes the most righteous thing you can do is pursue justice while still keeping your heart free from hate. I felt like she was speaking directly to me. After the service, Pastor Denise came up to me at the coffee hour. "I haven't seen you here before." "I just moved to the neighborhood," I said. "Well, welcome to New Hope. I'm Pastor Denise, but everyone calls me Pastor D." "Mildred Burke." Her eyes widened slightly. "The Mildred Burke? From the Ashford estate?" Word traveled fast, apparently. "That's me. I heard about the lawsuit. Your children are claiming you stole their inheritance?" She shook her head. "That must be painful." I felt tears prick my eyes. "It is." "Come have coffee with me this week," Pastor D said. "Tuesday afternoon. We have a support group that meets here, people dealing with family estrangement. You might find it helpful." I went to that meeting on Tuesday. There were 8 of us sitting in a circle in the church basement. A man whose children hadn't spoken to him in 5 years because he'd come out as gay at 70. A woman whose son had stolen her identity and ruined her credit. An elderly couple whose daughter had put them in a nursing home and sold their house without permission. I wasn't alone. That realization hit me like a wave. I wasn't the only parent who'd been betrayed by their own children. We talked for 2 hours. We cried together. We shared strategies for coping, for healing, for moving forward. And when I left that church basement, I felt stronger than I had in months. Pastor D walked me out. "You're going to be okay, Mildred. I can see it in you. You're a survivor." "I'm trying to be." "Keep trying, and keep coming back. Community is how we heal." I did keep coming back. Every Sunday for service, every Tuesday for the support group. The people at New Hope became my people. They didn't care about my money or my mansion. They cared about me, Mildred, the woman who was learning to stand on her own feet again. Meanwhile, the lawsuit dragged on. Quincy filed motion after motion, buried Tanya's lawyer in paperwork, and built our defense like he was constructing a fortress. Then 2 months into the legal battle, Quincy called me with news. "We need to talk about your investment in Ashford Industries." "What about it?" "When did you say you made that investment?" 1969, I gave Mr. Ashford Sr. $2,000. "And you received shares in return?" "Yes, but they were just a small amount. The dividend checks were never more than $100. "Mrs. Burke," Quincy said slowly, "those shares have been splitting and growing for over 50 years, and the company has expanded into multiple subsidiaries. Do you have any idea what those original shares are worth now?" "No." "Roughly $12 million. The room spun. "That's not possible." "It's very possible. Mr. Ashford Sr. set up your shares in a separate trust that's been reinvesting dividends all these years. Wendell knew about it. That's why he left you everything else. He knew you already had a substantial stake in the family business. You're not just an heir, Mrs. Burke. You're one of the founding investors of Ashford Industries." I sat down before my legs gave out. $12 million? Give or take, depending on the market. The point is, this changes everything about the lawsuit. Your children are claiming you manipulated Wendell for his money, but you already had your own fortune. You just didn't know it. Why didn't I know it? The paperwork was sent to an old address according to the trust documents. Your parents' house, where you lived before you married Clayton. When you didn't respond, the trustees assumed you wanted the dividends to keep reinvesting. They've been managing the account for you all this time. I thought about all the years I'd struggled, all the times Clayton and I had worried about money, all the nights I'd lain awake wondering how we'd pay for the kids' college. And all that time I'd been a millionaire without knowing it. "Can we access these funds?" I asked. "They're already yours. I'm having the paperwork transferred to your name with the updated address. You should have access within the week." When I hung up the phone, I started laughing. Not happy laughter, but the kind of laughter that comes when life gets so absurd you can't do anything else. My children thought they'd left me with nothing. They had no idea I'd built something on my own, decades before they were even born. The first thing I did with my newly discovered fortune was hire a private investigator. If my children wanted to dig into my life, I'd dig into theirs. The investigator's name was Rochelle Hamilton, a former police detective who now ran her own agency. She was thorough, discreet, and she didn't ask questions about why I wanted information on my own kids. What she found made me sick. Tanya's real estate business was failing. She'd made bad investments and lost most of her clients. She was 3 months behind on her mortgage and facing foreclosure. Deshaun had gambling debts, serious ones. He owed money to people who didn't politely ask for repayment. Crystal and her husband Roger had taken out a second mortgage on their house to invest in a business venture that had gone belly up. They were drowning in debt. All 3 of my children were broke, desperate, and counting on my inheritance from Wendell to save them. They didn't just want your house, Rochelle explained, showing me bank statements and credit reports. They needed it. They were already in financial trouble when your husband died. Selling your house was supposed to solve their problems. But they each got over $100,000 from that sale, I said, which they burned through in less than a year. Look at these credit card statements. Designer clothes, expensive cars, luxury vacations. They spent money they didn't have trying to look like they had money. I stared at the evidence spread across my dining room table. My children had stolen my home not out of malice but out of desperation. Somehow that made it worse. There's something else, Rochelle said. She pulled out another document. The trust that supposedly gave them the right to sell your house? I had a forensics expert look at it. The signature is forged. Your husband never signed those papers. My hands started shaking. Can you prove it? In court? Maybe. It would require testimony from handwriting experts, and even then it's not a guarantee. But yeah, I'm 99% sure those documents were falsified. I had proof that my children were not just greedy, but criminals. Quincy wanted to use the information immediately. We can file criminal charges, fraud, forgery, theft. We can have them arrested. But I hesitated. As much as they'd hurt me, they were still my children. The thought of putting them in jail made me physically ill. Let me think about it, I told Quincy. Don't think too long. They're not showing you the same mercy. He was right. 3 days later, Vernon Pike filed an emergency motion claiming I was liquidating Wendell's assets and hiding money. It was completely false, but it meant another court appearance, more depositions, more stress. I was getting ready for that hearing when I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. Grandma? My heart stopped. I knew that voice. Aaliyah? Aaliyah was Tanya's daughter, my oldest grandchild. She was 19 now, in college somewhere on the East Coast. I hadn't spoken to her since before Clayton died. Grandma, I just heard about the lawsuit. I can't believe Mom is doing this to you. You know about it? She called me asking if I'd testify that you were mean to her growing up, that you were controlling and manipulative. Grandma, I told her no. I told her she was wrong. Tears filled my eyes. Thank you, baby. Is it true you were homeless? That they really threw you out? Yes. Aaliyah was crying now. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know. Mom told me you'd moved to a nice apartment, that you were doing fine. If I'd known, I would have helped you. I would have done something. It's not your fault. Can I see you? I'm on spring break next week. I can drive down. I'd like that very much. Aaliyah came to visit on a Tuesday. She pulled up to the mansion in her beat-up college car and just sat there staring for a full minute before getting out. When she hugged me, I held on tight to this grandchild who still loved me. We spent the day together. I showed her the house, made her lunch, and we talked. Really talked, for the first time in years. Mom's drowning, Aaliyah told me. She won't admit it, but I can tell. She and Dad are fighting all the time. They might get divorced. And she's obsessed with this lawsuit. She talks about it constantly, about how you stole what should be hers. I didn't steal anything. I know. I read the articles online. Mr. Ashford left you his estate because you took care of him. That's not stealing. That's kindness being rewarded. Your mother doesn't see it that way. My mother doesn't see a lot of things clearly anymore. Aaliyah shook her head. What happened to her, Grandma? She used to be different. I remember when I was little, she was fun. She laughed. Now she just seems angry all the time. I don't know, baby. I really don't know. Before Aaliyah left, she hugged me again. I'm going to testify for you if this goes to trial. I'm going to tell the truth about what kind of person you are. That might make your mother hate you. Then she'll hate me. But I'm not going to lie for her. Not about this. After she left, I felt hope for the first time in weeks. Not all of my legacy was ruined. Aaliyah was good and strong and true. Whatever mistakes I'd made raising Tanya, I'd done something right because Aaliyah turned out beautiful. The court date arrived on a rainy Thursday in April. I wore my best suit and sat beside Quincy in the courtroom while the judge reviewed Vernon Pike's emergency motion. Tanya, Deshawn, and Crystal sat on the other side of the room. They wouldn't look at me. Couldn't look at me. The judge, a black woman named Honorable Andrea Lawson, read through the motion with a deep frown on her face. Mr. Pike, she finally said, you're claiming Mrs. Burke is hiding assets that belong to the Ashford estate? Yes, Your Honor. We have reason to believe she's transferring money offshore and liquidating investments. And your evidence for this claim? Vernon Pike shuffled papers. We have testimony from the plaintiffs that large sums have been moving through various accounts. Testimony is not evidence. Do you have bank records, transaction histories, anything concrete? We're in the process of gathering. So no, you don't have evidence. Judge Lawson looked at Quincy. Does the defense wish to respond? Quincy stood. Your Honor, the only assets Mrs. Burke has accessed are her own. She recently became aware of an investment account that has been in her name since 1969. The funds in that account belong to her and have nothing to do with Mr. Ashford's estate. Judge Lawson raised an eyebrow. An investment account from 1969? Yes, Your Honor. Mrs. Burke was one of the founding investors in Ashford Industries. Her shares have been held in trust for over 50 years. She only recently learned of their existence. So Mrs. Burke had her own fortune before Mr. Ashford died? Substantially, yes. The judge looked at Vernon Pike. Mr. Pike, it seems your entire theory is that Mrs. Burke manipulated Mr. Ashford for his money. But if she already had money of her own, that theory falls apart rather quickly, doesn't it? Vernon Pike's face went red. The existence of one fortune doesn't preclude the desire for another. Enough. This motion is denied, and Mr. Pike, if you bring me another emergency motion without concrete evidence, I'll sanction you for wasting the court's time. She banged her gavel, and it was over. I looked across the courtroom at my children. Tanya's face was white with shock. Deshawn was whispering furiously to Vernon Pike. Crystal was crying. Outside the courthouse, Quincy shook my hand. That was a good day for us. The judge is skeptical of their case now. We have momentum. But as I walked to my car, I heard footsteps behind me. Mama, wait! I turned to see Deshawn jogging after me. For a moment, I hoped he was going to apologize, to tell me this had all been a terrible mistake. You really not going to help us? He asked instead. Help you? You got all this money now, millions of dollars, and you're just going to let us lose our homes? Let us suffer? I stared at my son. You let me sleep in a shelter. We didn't know you were in a shelter. We thought you were in that apartment. You didn't know because you never bothered to check. You took what you wanted from me and then you disappeared. For months, Deshawn. Months. I called you and you never answered. I was busy. Too busy for your mother? The woman who raised you? I felt anger rising up like a flood. You're standing here asking me for money after you sued me, after you tried to take everything from me. Again. Where is your shame? We're family. No, I said. Family doesn't throw each other in the street. Family doesn't forge documents and steal homes. You stopped being my family when you decided I was nothing more than a bank account. So that's it? You're just going to cut us off forever? You cut me off first. I'm just accepting what you already decided. I got in my car and drove away, leaving my son standing in the parking lot. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Deshawn's face, the desperation in his eyes. I thought about Tanya and Crystal, drowning in debt, watching their lives fall apart. Part of me wanted to help them. Part of me still loved them, despite everything. But then I remembered the cold, the shelter, the fear, the feeling of being completely alone in the world. They'd done that to me, and they weren't even sorry. At 2 a.m, my phone rang. It was Rochelle, my investigator. "Mrs. Burke, I'm sorry to call so late, but you need to know something." "What is it?" "Your children just hired a different kind of lawyer, not Vernon Pike, someone else. Someone who specializes in competency hearings." My blood went cold. What does that mean? It means they're going to try to have you declared mentally incompetent. They're going to claim you're too old, too confused, too easily manipulated to manage your own affairs. If they succeed, they can have themselves appointed as your guardians. And if they're your guardians, they control everything. Your money, your property, your entire life. I sat up in bed, my heart pounding. They can do that? If they get the right doctor to sign off on it, yeah. And Mrs. Burke? The doctor they've scheduled you to see next week? He's known for diagnosing dementia in elderly patients whose families want access to their money. He's a professional liar who'll say whatever he's paid to say. This wasn't just about the mansion anymore. This wasn't about Wendell's inheritance. My children were trying to take my freedom, and they were willing to destroy me completely to get what they wanted. I didn't go to that doctor's appointment. Instead, I scheduled my own evaluation with 3 independent physicians, all recommended by Quincy. I spent a full day being tested, questioned, and examined. Memory tests, cognitive assessments, psychological evaluations. I answered every question, solved every puzzle, and proved beyond any doubt that my mind was sharp as ever. When Tanya's new lawyer, a woman named Greta Stevenson, tried to file for a competency hearing, Quincy buried her in medical documentation. 3 doctors, all highly respected, all stating clearly that I was fully competent and capable of managing my own affairs. Judge Lawson denied the petition without even holding a hearing. "This court will not be used as a weapon for financial abuse," she stated in her written order. "The petitioners have repeatedly brought frivolous motions without evidence. If they continue this pattern, I will dismiss the underlying case with prejudice and award costs to the defendant." It was a warning shot across my children's bow. But they didn't stop. Vernon Pike withdrew from the case, probably realizing it was a sinking ship. Greta Stevenson took over completely, and she was meaner, sharper, more aggressive. She filed motions claiming I'd had an inappropriate relationship with Wendell. She subpoenaed my medical records, my financial records, my phone records. She was looking for anything she could twist into evidence of wrongdoing. At the same time, my children started a whisper campaign in the old neighborhood. They told anyone who would listen that I'd abandoned my family, that I'd manipulated a dying man, that I was greedy and cruel. They painted themselves as victims and me as a villain. It hurt. Even though I knew the truth, even though I had evidence and witnesses and documentation, it hurt to hear those lies spread about me. But I wasn't alone anymore. The people at New Hope Baptist Church rallied around me. Pastor D preached a sermon about bearing false witness that had half the congregation shouting, "Amen!" My support group sent me cards and called to check on me. A woman named Beverly, whose son had stolen her car and sold it for drug money, started coming over for coffee every Wednesday morning. "They want you to feel isolated," Beverly told me. "They want you to think you're alone so you'll give up and give them what they want. But you're not alone. You got a whole church full of people who see the truth." She was right, and that community gave me strength to keep fighting. The trial was set for late June, 6 months after Tanya had first filed the lawsuit. 6 months of depositions and motions and legal warfare. I was exhausted, but I was ready. Quincy prepared me thoroughly. We went over my testimony again and again. We practiced questions Greta might ask. We reviewed all the evidence. Wendell's medical records, his written statements, testimony from his doctors, testimony from the cleaning service and gardeners who'd seen how I cared for him. We also have Aaliyah, Quincy reminded me. Your granddaughter's testimony is going to be powerful. She'll show the jury who you really are. The trial started on a Monday morning in late June. The courtroom was packed. My children sat with Greta Stevenson at the plaintiff's table. I sat with Quincy. Behind me, filling the gallery, were people from New Hope Baptist Church. Pastor D, Beverly, and a dozen others had taken the day off work to support me. Across the aisle, behind my children, there was almost nobody. Just their spouses, looking uncomfortable, and a few people I didn't recognize. The jury was selected. 8 women, 4 men. A mix of ages and backgrounds. They looked at me with curious but not unkind faces. Greta Stevenson's opening statement painted me as a calculating predator who'd targeted Wendell Ashford specifically because he was wealthy and alone. Mildred Burke was homeless and desperate, Greta said, pacing in front of the jury. She saw an opportunity, and she took it. She moved into Mr. Ashford's home, isolated him from what little family he had, and manipulated him into changing his will. This is textbook elder abuse, and the Ashford estate should be distributed according to the law, not according to the whims of a woman who took advantage of a dying man's loneliness. Quincy's opening statement was quieter but more powerful. Mildred Burke invested $2,000 in Ashford Industries in 1969, he said. She was 22 years old, working as a secretary, and she took a chance on a new company. That company became a multi-million-dollar enterprise, and Mrs. Burke's investment grew with it. She was already wealthy before she ever moved into the Ashford estate. She didn't need Wendell Ashford's money. What she needed was a friend, and what he needed was companionship in his final days. This case isn't about elder abuse. It's about greed. The plaintiffs are Mrs. Burke's own children, children who forced her out of her home and left her homeless, children who are now drowning in debt and saw their mother's inheritance as a life raft. But that inheritance isn't theirs. It never was. And all the lies in the world won't change that truth. The first week of trial was brutal. Greta called witnesses who testified that they'd rarely seen Wendell in his final year, that he'd become reclusive, that they'd been concerned about his well-being. She implied, over and over, that I was the reason for his isolation. Quincy cross-examined each witness carefully, getting them to admit they'd never actually visited Wendell, never called him, never reached out. Their concern was retroactive and convenient. Then Greta called Tanya to the stand. My daughter wore a conservative dress and minimal makeup. She looked smaller somehow, fragile. She was playing the part of the concerned daughter, and she was playing it well. When did you first become concerned about your mother's living situation? Greta asked. After my father died, Tanya said, her voice soft. Mama was grieving so hard. We were worried she couldn't take care of herself anymore. The house was too much for her to handle alone. So you tried to help her? Yes. We found her an apartment, a nice place that would be easier to manage. We thought we were doing the right thing. And what happened after your mother moved into that apartment? She disappeared. We didn't know where she'd gone. We were terrified something had happened to her. I watched my daughter lie under oath, and I felt something inside me break. Not my spirit. That was stronger than ever. But the last little piece of hope I'd been holding on to. The hope that maybe she'd tell the truth. Maybe she'd finally be honest about what they'd done. That hope shattered. Quincy stood for cross-examination. Ms. Marshall, you testified that you were worried about your mother. Is that correct? Yes. Yet you didn't answer her phone calls, did you? Tanya hesitated. I was busy. Too busy to answer your grieving mother's calls? How many times did she try to reach you? I don't remember. Quincy pulled out phone records. According to these records, your mother called you 17 times in the 2 months after she moved into that apartment you claim was so nice. You answered twice. Is that correct? I suppose so. And you testified that you didn't know where she'd gone. But you also testified you were terrified. Yet you never filed a missing persons report, did you? No. Never contacted the police? No. Never hired a private investigator to find your missing, terrified mother? Tanya's face was red now. We thought she'd contact us when she was ready. Or you didn't actually care where she was, as long as she was gone and you had her money. Isn't that the truth? Objection! Greta was on her feet. Sustained, Judge Lawson said. Mr. Patterson, rephrase. Ms. Marshall, let's talk about that apartment you found for your mother. How much was the rent? I don't remember exactly. Let me refresh your memory. $1,500 a month, correct? That sounds right. And your mother's portion from the sale of her home was $75,000? Yes. Did you help her budget that money? Help her understand how long it would last? We assumed she knew how to manage money. You assumed, but you didn't actually help. And when she ran out of money after 2 months, when she was evicted, when she ended up in a homeless shelter, you didn't know because you weren't answering her calls, correct? Tanya was crying now. Real tears or fake ones, I couldn't tell anymore. I didn't know she was in a shelter. Because you didn't care enough to find out. Objection! Withdrawn. No further questions. Tanya left the stand looking defeated. Deshawn and Crystal testified next, and Quincy tore apart their testimonies too. He showed the jury the phone records, the timeline, the evidence of their neglect. Then Greta made a mistake. She called a distant cousin of Wendell's, a man named Harold Ashford who I'd never met. Harold testified that Wendell had always been close with his extended family, and he was shocked that Wendell had left everything to a stranger. On cross-examination, Quincy asked one simple question. When was the last time you saw or spoke to Wendell Ashford? Harold thought about it. I suppose it was at his father's funeral, 1995. So you hadn't seen or spoken to your cousin in over 25 years, yet you're claiming you were close? We were family. Family that never visited, never called, never checked in. Until there was money involved. No further questions. The second week, Quincy presented our case. He called Wendell's doctors, who testified about his sharp mind right up until his death. He called the cleaning service employees, who described how happy Wendell had seemed in his final year, how the house had felt like a home again with me there. He called people from New Hope Baptist Church, who testified about my character, my kindness, my involvement in the community. And then he called Aaliyah. My granddaughter walked to the stand with her head held high. She wore a simple dress and no makeup, and she looked so much like I had at her age that my heart ached. Aaliyah, what is your relationship to Mildred Burke? Quincy asked. She's my grandmother, my mother's mother. And what is your relationship to the plaintiffs? Tanya Marshall is my mother. Deshawn Burke is my uncle. Crystal Thompson is my aunt. Did your mother ask you to testify in this case? Yes. She wanted me to say that my grandmother was manipulative and controlling when I was growing up. And is that true? Aaliyah looked right at the jury. No, it's not true at all. My grandmother was the most loving, giving person in my childhood. She babysat me when my parents worked. She came to every school play and recital. She taught me to bake and to pray and to stand up for myself. She was wonderful. What happened after your grandfather died? My mom changed. She became obsessed with money. She and my dad fought constantly about it. And she started talking about my grandmother like she was a burden, like she was in the way. I didn't understand it then, but I understand it now. She wanted the house. Did you know your grandmother had been forced out of her home? Not at the time. My mother told me Grandma had moved to a nice apartment and was doing fine. When I found out the truth, that she'd been homeless, that she'd been in shelters, Aaliyah's voice broke. I was horrified. I was ashamed of my own mother. Why did you decide to testify today? Because my grandmother deserves someone to tell the truth about her. She's not a manipulator or a con artist. She's a good woman who was treated terribly by her own children, and I won't be part of that. I won't lie for my mother. Not about this. When Aaliyah stepped down, she walked past her mother without looking at her and came to sit behind me. She put her hand on my shoulder and squeezed, and I reached up to hold it. Greta tried to repair the damage in her cross-examination, but there was no fixing it. Aaliyah was young and honest and credible, and the jury clearly believed her. The final witness was me. I walked to the stand on shaking legs, put my hand on the Bible, and swore to tell the truth. As if I'd ever do anything else. Quincy took me through my whole story, my marriage to Clayton, raising my children, Clayton's death, being forced out of my home, the shelter, meeting Wendell. Mrs. Burke, when Wendell Ashford offered you a position in his household, did you know how wealthy he was? I knew he had a nice house. That was about it. Did you seek the position? No, he approached me. I was sitting in the library trying to stay warm and look for work. He remembered me from the neighborhood. Did you know about your investment in Ashford Industries at that time? No. I'd forgotten all about those shares. It was 50 years ago, and the dividend checks were so small I never thought much of it. When did you learn the full extent of your investment's value? After Wendell died, after the will was read. My lawyer tracked down the trust and told me what it was worth. So you were already a multimillionaire before Wendell left you the estate? I guess I was. I still can't quite believe it. Why do you think Wendell left you his estate? I thought about that question. I thought about the quiet man who'd saved my life, who'd become my friend, who'd made me feel human again when my own children had made me feel disposable. Because I was there, I said simply. Because I listened to him and talked with him and made him feel less alone. Because he knew what it felt like to be abandoned by family, and he didn't want me to suffer that way. And because I'd believed in him and his father when they were just starting out, and he never forgot that. Did you manipulate him? No. Did you isolate him? No. He was already isolated. I just kept him company. Did you love him? I felt tears in my eyes. Not romantically, but yes, I loved him. He was a good man and a true friend, and I miss him every day. Greta Stevenson's cross-examination was aggressive. She tried to trap me in contradictions, tried to make me seem calculating or deceptive. But I just told the truth, over and over, and eventually she ran out of questions. Closing arguments happened on a Friday afternoon. Greta made one last attempt to paint me as a villain. Quincy reminded the jury of the evidence, the testimony, and the simple truth that I'd done nothing wrong. The plaintiffs claim Mildred Burke stole an inheritance, Quincy said. But you can't steal what's freely given. Wendell Ashford made his choice with a clear mind and a full heart. He left his estate to the woman who'd shown him kindness when he needed it most. That's not abuse. That's gratitude. And if the plaintiffs had shown their mother half the kindness she showed a dying stranger, we wouldn't be here today. The jury deliberated for 3 hours. When they came back, the forewoman stood and read the verdict. We find in favor of the defendant, Mildred Burke, on all counts. The courtroom erupted. People from New Hope Baptist Church were cheering. Pastor D shouted, "Thank you, Jesus!" Aaliyah threw her arms around me and we both cried. Across the aisle, my children sat in stunned silence. Judge Lawson banged her gavel. "Order! I will have order!" When the room quieted, she looked at Tanya, Deshawn, and Crystal. I am awarding costs to the defendant. You will reimburse Mrs. Burke for her legal fees, which I imagine are substantial. Additionally, I am referring this matter to the District Attorney's Office for investigation of potential fraud regarding the trust documents that were used to force Mrs. Burke from her home. You may face criminal charges. Court is adjourned. She banged the gavel one final time, and it was over. Outside the courthouse, reporters were waiting. I'd become something of a local story. Elderly woman fights her own children for her inheritance. I gave a brief statement. I didn't want it to come to this, I said. I wanted my children to love me more than they loved money. But sometimes we don't get what we want. We get what we need. And what I needed was justice. I got that today. Will you reconcile with your children? A reporter asked. I thought about that. If they ever apologize, truly apologize, and show me they understand what they did wrong, maybe someday we can have a relationship again. But I'm not holding my breath. Some things can't be fixed. That night, New Hope Baptist Church threw me a celebration dinner. The whole congregation came. We had fried chicken and greens and mac and cheese and sweet potato pie. We sang hymns and gave testimonies and praised God for justice being served. Pastor D gave a blessing over the meal. Lord, we thank you for Mildred Burke, a woman who stood strong in the face of betrayal and fought for what was right. We thank you for reminding us that you see the truth even when others spread lies. And we thank you for this community, this family we've built together, that supports and loves each other the way family should. Amen. Amen, everyone chorused. I looked around at these people who'd become my true family, and I felt a peace I hadn't known in years. 2 weeks after the trial, Rochelle called me with an update. The district attorney had indeed filed charges against Tanya, Deshawn, and Crystal. Fraud, forgery, and theft. They were facing serious prison time if convicted. I could have felt satisfaction. Part of me did, but mostly I just felt sad. Then Rochelle told me something else. Your children are negotiating plea deals. Part of the deal is they have to pay restitution, return the money they stole from the house sale, plus damages. They're losing everything. Their houses, their cars, their savings. They'll be on probation for years. What happens if they can't pay the restitution? Then they go to prison. I thought about my children behind bars and I felt sick. How much do they owe? Total, with legal fees and damages? About $400,000. I could write a check for that amount without even noticing it was gone. I was worth well over $20 million now between Wendell's estate and my own investments. The question was, should I? I talked to Pastor D about it. We sat in her office at the church, drinking tea, while I wrestled with the decision. What does your heart tell you? She asked. My heart is confused. Part of me wants them to suffer the way they made me suffer. Part of me still loves them and doesn't want to see them destroyed. What about your spirit? What does your spirit say? I sat with that question. My spirit says I can't heal while I'm still holding on to hate, but I also can't let them think what they did was okay. So what's the middle ground? I thought about it for a long time. Finally, I knew what I had to do. I paid their restitution. All of it. I wrote one check that saved my children from prison. But I did it anonymously, through a lawyer they'd never met, with one condition. They had to accept the plea deal, which included admitting guilt, public apologies, and 5 years of probation. And they could never know the money came from me. As far as they know, some charity organization paid their debt. They'll spend the rest of their lives wondering who saved them and why. I also had my lawyer send them each a letter. It said, "Your debt has been paid, but not by me. Someone showed you mercy you didn't deserve, the same way you refused to show me mercy when I needed it. I hope you think about that. I hope you learn from it. I hope you become better people. But whether you do or not, I'm done carrying the weight of your choices. I forgive you, not because you deserve it, but because I deserve peace. Don't contact me again." I don't know if they learned anything from it. I don't know if they're sorry or just sorry they got caught. And honestly, I don't care anymore. I released them, and in doing so, I released myself. Aaliyah comes to visit once a month now. She brings her boyfriend sometimes, a nice young man studying engineering. We cook together and talk about her classes and her dreams. She wants to be a teacher, and I'm helping pay for her education. "You don't have to do that, Grandma," she said. "I want to. You stood by me when no one else would. You told the truth when you could have stayed silent. That kind of integrity deserves to be rewarded." I've also started a foundation with some of Wendell's money. The Ashford Burke Foundation provides housing assistance to elderly people being pushed out of their homes by family members. We've already helped 12 people in 6 months. We connect them with lawyers, find them safe places to live, and give them the support they need to fight back. Beverly from my support group runs the foundation. She knows exactly what these folks are going through, and she's fierce in defending them. Every Sunday, I go to New Hope Baptist Church. Every Tuesday, I attend the support group. Every Wednesday, Beverly comes over for coffee. Every month, Aaliyah visits. My calendar is full of people who chose to love me, and I chose to love back. I still live in the Ashford estate, but I've made it my own. I've filled it with pictures and warmth and life. I host church gatherings and support group meetings and foundation events. The mansion that was once a lonely monument to wealth is now a home filled with purpose. Sometimes I drive past my old house, the one Clayton and I raised our children in. A young family lives there now. I see their kids playing in the yard, and I remember when my kids were that small and innocent. I mourn for the relationship we could have had, should have had, but didn't. But I don't mourn for long. Because I've learned that family isn't always blood. Sometimes it's the people who show up for you when blood relatives walk away. Sometimes it's the church members who cheer at your trial. Sometimes it's the granddaughter who tells the truth even when it costs her. Sometimes it's the lonely man who offers you shelter when you have nowhere else to go. I'm 80 years old now. I've been betrayed, abandoned, homeless, and lost. I've also been rescued, vindicated, blessed, and found. I've learned that resilience isn't about never falling down. It's about getting back up, dusting yourself off, and building something beautiful from the broken pieces. My children wanted to leave me with nothing. Instead, they pushed me toward everything I was meant to have. The mansion, the money, the foundation, the community. None of it would exist if they hadn't betrayed me. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you leads you to the best thing waiting for you. You just have to be brave enough to keep walking through the darkness until you find the light. I found my light. I'm standing in it now, warm and bright and home. And I'm never looking back. Thank you for staying with us through this journey. Please subscribe for more stories and drop a comment. We read every single one.